simple. You see me smiling from ear to ear. Happy to welcome one of my favorite people in the industry, someone I'm lucky to have join me for my podcast for the second time. This is the first time on this iteration of my podcast, a guy who, by his own admission, has flown under the radar in the storage industry. He's kind of been like a silent ninja, building amazing projects, really concentrating out on the West, Arizona, Colorado, that area. But never been a big person putting himself out there, which is why I'm really grateful and blessed that he agreed to come and talk to me, because I think by his own choice, he probably would rather stay behind the scenes. But Tony Ardizzone, want to thank you for coming and hopping on with me.
Thanks, Thaddeus. I appreciate the time, the consideration, and I'm grateful for our friendship and you getting me out of my box and my comfort zone. So thank you for that.
Oh, I love that. We have so many conversations that go well beyond self-storage about, just about being adults. We're of a similar age. We got a similar color to our hair these days, kind of a similar mindset. We bonded a lot about that. And I guess I want to talk to you about that before your real estate career. And by the way, people can go back. Tony was on my podcast back in 2022. So if you really want to get that, I can find that for you and get you the first one. We kind of talked about your start in real estate. I want to talk a little bit tonight about your athletic background and kind of how that mindset played a role in what you've been able to do in your construction and development career.
Wow, that's a great question. I've never been asked that before. So yeah, thank you. I think it's probably best to explain it that, I've got 5 children, and my daughters, my youngest 2 daughters, said to me, I think it was during the housing market, right? When the housing was just crazy all over the place. And I ended up, having to bid on a new house, and I bought my first house over the internet, of all things, through an auction. And when I ended up winning, when the real estate person called me and said, "Hey, you won, blah blah blah," and it's like, "You don't seem that excited." I'm like, "Well, how many bidders were there?" They said, "Well, there's 54 bidders," and I said, "Yeah, I paid too much." And when I told my daughters that, they were exuberant. They were jumping up and down and so forth. And my littlest one says, Ellis is like, "Dad, how did you do this? How did you get it?" And Ava, the one that's 13 months older, says, "Did you even doubt Dad? He always gets whatever he puts his mind to," right? And that kind of is my mindset, right, from the beginning. And I want to contribute all that to my family, to my parents, immigrants from Italy. My father's Italian, my mother's Venezuelan, so I speak Italian and Spanish enough to get by on the Spanish side. But it was, we weren't given the luxury of screwing up, right? So the only thing that really kept us going was hard work. My old man was taking us to work with him when we were in grade school. I hated it. I was mixing mortar, lifting blocks, carrying wheelbarrows full of cement. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that my summer job was all about. And during school time, it was always sports, always full with sports. My brother and I both that way. So I think the discipline from that was incredibly important, and it carried over into my adulthood, into my college life. I played at a collegiate level, at a high level. I played at Arizona State. So it was one of those things where when the competition's high, you play at a higher level, right? And that goes for anything. That goes in life, and that goes for sports, and it goes for business, and it goes for just even the people you associate with, right? I mean, you are who you run with, right? So that's a big part of what I instill that in my children today, and it's a big part of who I am. And it was also, this real estate game's also been one of those things where I looked at it as competition, right? If there's 3 or 4 separate offers on an asset that I want to go after, or a property I want to go after, I made sure to put my best foot forward, and I competed. I looked at it as an event, as a sports event, and that's just my background, right? Or I know for you, you do some MMA fighting and things of that nature. So, those are I fought my way out of
that. I did.
Well, you know what it's like, right? At the end of the day, to get in a fight, right? And so this is what we deal with every day, just life in general, whether it's health, wealth, illness, meeting people. Life is it's fun, but you got to make it fun. So yeah. So
You
thanks for
said so
asking
many
that
things
question.
there. So many things that you said that made me want to follow up. First of all, we talked about this. My wife's parents were off the boat Italian, and my wife right now is at her hair salon at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday night, doing hair while we're taping this episode, and just work ethic to the bone. It's actually really really impressive to see. My dad's father, my grandfather moved over the border, 40-acre potato farm, and just kind of that work ethic thing, but going into sports. And I think this is fascinating, right? Like, I'll never forget my very first professional kickboxing fight. I was standing backstage before I was getting ready to go fight, and I was looking at the exit sign, quite frankly, thinking about walking out, right? This is the reality of what we go through.
Sure.
We talked about this recently. It's the fights in here, right? It's those battles that you have in your mind that very few people talk about, very few people see, right? These things are hard. And of course, now we're dealing with self-storage projects. You're a ground up developer. Right now, we're penciling projects that are 12, 15, 18 million dollars to build. You can't help but have those moments of doubt when you're going through that. So I would love for you to explain to me a little bit kind of the mentality of how do you go through that? Like, you're looking at a new project, and you're keeping that, like, how do you keep that mindset of, hey, this is going to be successful?
Wow, that's a great question. Thaddeus, it's you got to swing the bat, right? So I'm going to relate it to baseball. So you got to get in the batter's box and you got to swing. And if you don't fail, then you're not doing things right, right? And I think my motto's always been, I'm humble enough to fail, but also I'm confident enough to get it all back, right? And that's because I've done it. And it's that first one. It's that first one. Get that first one under your belt and just know it works. I can tell you that one of my first ones happened to be right before the housing crisis, right when I got back into the family business. We've been doing this 44 plus years, 1979, right when my father, he's a architect and got into the storage business, and it's one of those things where I've been watching this journey from afar, and then I dipped in, 2001. So I've taken control over 24 years, and I've watched the bads. I think this is my third cycle I'm going through here, but I've watched it, and I've seen the worst of the worst, to the point where, interest rates, the housing market, the banks shutting you off, completely shutting you down, wanting more capital call from the bank, that kind of deal. And the fact is that you go through those hard times, you go through those lessons, and you will find out that, the resiliency of not only you as a person to get through that, thankfully, having a good supportive family and a wife and everything that comes along with that is so important. And if you're going along that journey on your own, it's good to have the accountability, have some mentorship, have some people that you can walk and talk through and strategize with, at the end of the day. But that was one of those things where I think in 44 years, that one project that I'm alluding to, it took 4.5 years to stabilize. The longest it's ever taken any of our properties ever. Normally we stabilize and lease up because they're Class A stuff that we do, institutional grade. I'm usually stabilized within 8 months, right? 8 to 14 months is probably the longest I've ever done that. And that's because of the metrics and so forth that we go after in certain demographic regions. But to see that length of time, hey, look, talk about humbleness. I had over $125 million worth of projects going at that time. And to have the spigot turned off, and then just focus on that, where my significant other would say to me, do you know that you're spending $800 a month in gas going out to that project? And I'm like, no, you're kidding me, right? So I went from driving, the nice car and the big suburban type of deal in my three-piece suit that I'd go to Wall Street with, to throwing on jeans and a polo shirt and getting behind the counter and renting units. So I've done the full circle, right? Whatever it takes, whatever it takes. And I think knowing that you can get out of this, of any challenge, of even the worst recessionary times that we've had in the last few decades, during that housing crisis, I guess you could say it was July 13th, 2007 through, really carried over into 2012, close to 13. We came out of it, thankfully. It actually helped me establish my relationships, because of the transparency and being forthright and being open with, some of the partnerships. Now I'm a preferred partner of Extra Space Storage, was Life Storage, which just recently got bought out, and do a lot of work with
Small transaction.
CubeSmart. Yeah, but it was more the relationships, right? So now I'm kind of like that preferred partner of 20 some years that has been in the middle of that. And, circling back to your question, how do you get through it, and how do people at the end of the day have that resiliency to keep going through that? It is knowing that failure is not going to define you.
You were going through talking about the partnership and the preferred partnership with Extra Space.
Yeah, you want to pick that back up there?
Pick it right up. We'll splice it together.
Okay. Yeah, so the transparency and the realness with those partnerships have evolved into what it is today, right? I can basically pick up the phone and get all the details I need. I guess, I hate to say it, I'm not smart enough to have all that kind of knowledge. I mean, they've got so much data that the algorithms and so forth that they play really help us on the back end of really picking the right sites and so forth. But, if I could tell all your listeners out there, all this hype out there, all this stuff you're seeing it on Instagram, you're seeing it on Facebook, you're seeing all these guys trying to raise money for storage assets, this, that, and the other. Look, guys, there's not enough meat on the bone, right, for everybody to eat. And so I'm saying that, and some people are probably shaking their heads at me, but I'm just telling the truth. When you start looking at interest rates right now at SOFR plus 450 basis points, and you're buying these assets that are halfway decent at a 6 cap, 6.5 cap, because that's what the market's still at. It just doesn't jive. It doesn't work, right? The only way you're going to be able to get those values in those assets is if you raise rents. Well, don't you think some of those owners have tried that without having that attrition, right, happen to them on the bottom line? So you've really got to know what you're doing, what market it is. Really, there's true opportunity. I'm not going to say it's looking for a needle in a haystack, but you definitely are. You definitely need to know what you're doing. I think you and I talked about this last time, Thaddeus, is that, it used to be a lot easier to screw up. Even if you screwed up in our industry, you still came out kind of whole. It didn't hurt you as bad. Today, right, there's so much competition and the saturation levels in certain good markets at the end of the day. You've really got to understand your rental rates, your units, the web rates, the walk-in rates. There's a lot of things that happen on the back end that, guys who are coming over from multifamily or retail or office or whatever, thinking that our assets, one of the best. Yeah, it is one of the best, but it's also created this very heavy competitive environment to where, I used to see maybe a couple of good deals a week, in my career, and now I'm seeing a half a dozen a week that guys are just, they got in over their skis, as they say, right? So that's where we're at. That's where we're at. You got to know what you're doing.
Especially with what I've been doing for the last couple of years, really my role has been to go find land and flip it to other developers. And, you're seeing so many deals come across people's table right now that are like, they might be fully entitled. They might be ready to dig, but they're $3-4 million to buy the land. And like, listen, when you're paying 10% on construction loans and it was great during COVID when I first got into the industry, and an 8 to 14 month lease up like you've had success with was normal. The reality is that a lot of these places now are going to be 36. Some people are penciling to 48 month. They're penciling 4 year lease ups now because of the reality of what's been going on. Well, if you're carrying a construction loan for 8, 9, 10 million bucks at 10% interest for 4 years, you better make sure that you knew what you were doing when
That's
you
right.
got into it. Definitely not what it was a
That's right.
couple years ago.
Completely. You're spot on. You've hit it on the head. Not only that, the way that the lenders are now looking at it from an appraisal standpoint, from an underwriting analysis, right? Um, they're looking at web rates, right? I mean, those web rates are all being driven down, right? I mean, you got the explanation of trying to convince those lenders, appraisers, everybody else down the line that the in-store rate is a certain rate. But the fact of the matter is that now 80% of all customers, first-time customers, are coming in through the web. So it makes it a lot harder at the end of the day. You better get realistic with your underwriting.
Yeah, I think it's fun for me. I'm trying to find markets where I think that it's reasonable to expect a $25 a square foot rate, right? Which immediately, for any of you guys who know a whole lot about storage, you're shrinking massively what
Right.
you're looking at there. And you'll go into
Right.
markets that you think should have a $25 rate, and Extra Space and Cube and Public will be offering a 10 by 10 unit for 90 bucks on the web, which is $25 a year would be like a $200 a month, and they're offering it for 90. So you really
That's
have
right.
to dig and dive. I spent a bunch of time today making phone calls to directly to the stores, because what we see on the web is not always we have great tools now. You've got Radius Plus and Yardi and Store Track, these different data. The reality is, man, you got to dig. You got to be willing, and I think this goes back to us with our background as athletes. Like, you got to be willing to do the reps. You got to be willing to do the work, and
That's right.
it's not always fun. Sometimes you lose. Sometimes you see something that
Sometimes you
looks like
lose.
fun, and you got to walk away.
Well, knock on wood, we've never lost. But yeah, I've walked away from a lot of projects. I think I probably could have done another 30 to 40% more at the end of the day,
Yeah,
but I've got such a conservative approach to it all. And I've been in those positions, right? I sleep well at night for the simple fact that my ethics, my character, and my understanding of the business has allowed me not to get caught up in the hype. I'd rather, my old man used to say the best deal you're going to do is the deal you don't do. And so that's kind of the principles I've laid on. Look, I'm looking at a project right now um, that is a ground up situation. And I love the corner. I love everything about the market. The demographics are strong, right? Everything about this thing is great. It's got a street presence. It's on a hard corner. It'd almost be a hotel site. I mean, it's that great. Um, but the saturation levels and the price and the per square foot capita in there, even though there's maybe only a couple of real true competing properties of what we would build to that institutional grade, you've got all that other competition there that has to be taken into consideration, right? Even if you discount that consideration. So, yeah, I mean, you look at it and go, as much as I like it, I can't. It's going to be tough to convince a lender that my underwriting is going to be at that level, and it's going to be bringing it back. The last thing you want to ever do, and I've only been there once in all of, in my career, in my 24 years, and I think in 44 years of our family doing this, we've never gotten in that spot, is having a challenge where you have some kind of a capital call from a lender,
right.
and your bank is calling you up and saying, or your partner is calling you up and going, hey, uh, we've gone through our carried interest, and, we got to start feeding the horse, right?
Yeah.
So it's coming out of your pocket. So you never want to get to that spot if you can. You want to be able to lease up. You want to get there. And even with the way that the REITs are doing their lease ups today, there's a period of time there where, yes, they're going to get you in at a low rate, right? But truly, how long is it going to take them to get to that true economic occupancy that you're going to need to make that thing work, right? And like you said earlier, you may have to carry it 4.5 years and have that built in.
Yeah. Literally having this conversation. You talked about this earlier about the importance of mentors and the people you surround yourself with, and consider myself very fortunate to have some people like yourself and others that we were having that conversation early this morning. Hey, I was doing an underwriting model, and the question was, hey, did you bake in your interest costs for the first couple of years of the project? And because in all reality, you're going to have some interest reserves sitting there. I'm going to push on that idea in the context of the Fed raising interest rates in 2022, and things have gotten significantly more difficult. What do you tell the guys who maybe got into this in 2020, 2021, underwrote some projects? Life is a little different than maybe they thought it was going to be when they were underwriting stuff. What's your advice to those guys right now as we're entering 2024?
That's well, every situation's dynamics got their own dynamics to it, right? So I don't know what that really looks like. I don't know what kind of bridge or mezz debt or whatever at the end of the day that they got themselves into in 2021. You're fast forwarding 3 years. I'm hopeful that those guys are cash flowing enough to have debt service covered. If they're not, there's some bridge programs out there that should be looked at. There's some insurance stuff out there, life insurance kind of debt that can bridge some of the stuff. Especially if it's an existing asset and you're maybe you're struggling on your rents, but you've got a 80% physical occupancy to the project, or 70 somewhere in there. It's got some hope, right? At the end of the day, that you're going to come out of this without having to stroke a check monthly for it. So I would suggest do your best to try and find yourself a good lending partner that can kind of come to the rescue a little bit and take you out or bridge some of that at the end of the day. The challenge with that is that with the rates of where they're at today, I don't know what kind of a reprieve you're going to get. I mean, it's one of those things where I hate to say this, Thaddeus, but this is the part of what we were talking about getting in. You've got to underwrite these things as the worst case scenario. The problem with today's wannabe developers or existing developers is they put it on paper that they feel that, whatever it's going to need to make the deal or make it look like it's going to be a great deal to the bank or to the lender or to the investment partners, that's what they're going to show to do a deal. And a lot of these guys, I hate to say it, I'm not trying to bag on anyone here, but they make all their money up front. They fee these deals. We don't do it that way. We go along for the ride. If there's capital calls or anything like that, we're covering them, and we don't make our money until it's on the back end and everybody's paid back. So those are those things that I guess at the end of the day, you want to be able to tell your listeners and your viewers out there that, hey, make sure you're being wise and you're being practical and you're underwriting and you're actually assessing what it is and what it looks like today, and not because there's hype out there in the market right now that the Feds are going to cut their rates, in the summer sometime, or that's the hope for everybody. You and I both know whatever the Feds are going to cut their rates to is not going to be enough to do anything. Right? It's not going to move the needle whatsoever.
Funny enough, you say that. I heard a bunch of that out in Vegas at the ISS show a couple weeks ago when this airs. Today the report came out that inflation was higher than expected. So who knows if they're even going to cut rates, right? The Fed season inflation report they don't like, they might raise rates for all we know. If you got the crystal ball to predict what the Fed's going to do, you don't have to build self-storage. You can make a lot more money
That's right.
just betting on the money market. So, I love what you're saying there. It's something I've been fortunate enough to hear repeatedly over the last few years. Is I'm not quite as seasoned in storage as you. Man, you better be conservative when you underwrite these things, because you don't know. You can't predict 3-4 years from now what the market's going to look like.
No, yeah, you're exactly right. And I'm just so old school, right? I may be double nickels in age, right? But at the end of the day, I just I couldn't sleep well at night knowing I'm taking people's money, family money. At the end of the day, I see all these Netflix documentaries of all these guys who are just taking money and doing all that at the end of the day. I just wasn't raised that way, and it's one of those things where I would hope that, and most of the people in this industry are like that. They're good people in this industry, really good people, good character, good everything all the way around. I mean, it's just it breeds that. I guess maybe call it blue collar kind of a environment. It's now, Wall Street's obviously gotten into our game. Um, but the majority, 80% of the storage owners today are still mom and pops, and just good people, right? So we're hoping that at the end of the day, there's a lot of that in our industry, and we're not just bringing in money just from guys that are hoping to roll the dice. I mean, you're better. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit more calculated than going to Vegas and rolling the dice or putting it on red or black or whatever it is, right? The roulette wheel. Maybe a little bit more calculated, and people always think they're going to get out on the back end. I'm not going to name a whole lot of them, but there's a lot that have spent hundreds of millions of dollars that I know, developers that have, hoping that they could flip out of that, within 5 years. Well, that shift in the market's happened, and it has happened, and it's happened in a big way. And if you're not paying back, your distributions and your dividends to those investors, that's going to be a tough pill to swallow, and some people could sleep on that. I can't.
Yeah, I think it's so, poignant what you said, that when things are going gangbusters like they were in 2020, 2021 into 2022. Listen, we talked about this. We were seeing cap rates in the threes, maybe even in the high twos on some institutional grade storage facilities. People paying 30 plus years of net operating income to buy a facility. The chicken comes to roost, right? Like, you can't have that kind of crazy heyday without having some type of a blowback. And unfortunately, and it's sad to say, but we're seeing it. And there's some people that are going to, as someone with a sterling professional kickboxing record of 0-6, I can attest to the fact that there has to be a loser in every battle. Now, fortunately for me, the wins that came out of that were significant. But
You
when you're
bet.
talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of development, man, a loss is painful. And so love the advice and love the insight. Listen, man, I try and honor my listeners, and I try and honor my guests to try and keep this to a half hour. I could keep talking to you for hours. I want to tell people out there to stay tuned. Tony has got some big stuff happening. He's putting together his first fund. He and I are going to get together. We'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. Keep your eyes out. Follow my social media and Tony's. We'll keep you up to date on what's going on there. But really excited to dig in. This is someone, as he said, with 44 years of a track record of success. Very few people that you could invest with that can put the type of track record in front of you that he does. So I'm excited to dive in a little bit about that story and see where he's going with that, and give this is for accredited investors only. We want to make that very clear. It's not something that's open to the general public. We want to make sure that it's people that have the money to be able to invest, because it is an investment. But we'll talk deeper about that. In the meantime, Tony, somebody who wants to get a hold of you directly and talk deeper about storage or maybe an investment opportunity, what's the easiest way for someone to get a hold of you?
So first of all, I wanted to say thank you. I'm grateful and honored, man. I'm grateful for our friendship. And you said it earlier, and it's the best way to do it. We didn't bond over storage. We bonded over our life stories and our trials and tribulations. So thank you for that. And I just didn't know you were so eloquent. And now that I know your MMA record, that's even better. I'm your fan, man. I'll be your corner man on your
If
next
you ever want to have
run.
some fun, go get on YouTube and type in Thaddeus Campbell kickboxing, and you can have a few laughs at my expense.
Awesome. Awesome. Our website is, thanks for asking that. Our website is legacybuiltus.com, legacybuiltus.com. I'll be more than happy to send emails. My emails is Tony, Tony at zoneco.com. That's ZZONECO.com. And I'd even be bold enough to take on some calls. If people want to yell at me over this this podcast, that's I'll give you my work number. It's 480-719-3000. That's the way to get a hold of me. 480-719-3000.
Listen, man,
Appreciate
you so much. Look forward to talking again very, very soon, and you know, proud to call you my friend.
Thank you, Thaddeus. You too. Talk soon.